10 years ago, my ex and I were at the drive-ins on a Tuesday night. I only had Wednesdays off at the time, and it was perfect because Tuesday was $5 movie night. We watched Gone Girl, and the movie ended close to midnight, so it was late as we were leaving. I was the one driving, so we left the theaters and I hopped on the freeway to get home. As I got on the freeway, I was in the right lane and stuck behind a semi, so I put on my blinker to pass them on the left. It was late and I didn't see a car in sight besides the semi, so I got over to pass them. Not even a minute later, a white truck was behind me, flashing his brights and getting really close to my rear bumper. So my first thought is, crap, did I accidentally cut them off? Didn't seem likely, as I checked my mirrors and didn't see anyone behind me on the freeway at all. I got up past the semi and moved over to the right again, thinking, well, if I'd been a dick and cut this dude off, he can flip me off and be on his way. But no. As soon as there was enough of a gap, he filled the tiny space between me and the semi and was on my bumper again. My ex had fallen asleep and I didn't want to wake him yet, as this could just be some pissed off guy, and maybe I made a mistake and didn't see him. Granted, there are 3 whole empty lanes to the left of us. He could have passed me miles ago. He's still flashing his brights and tailing me, so I get over, hoping he'll just have established his dominance and moved on. I stop using my blinker when changing lanes, and he still just swerves to be right behind me. At this point I'm scared he's going to hit my bumper, and I bump up to 90 as he follows suit. I'm shaking, and finally nudge my ex with my elbow and say, babe, I think we're being followed. He wakes up and looks behind us, and I change lanes and he sees what I mean. My exit to get home isn't for another few miles, and I'm trying to get my ex to call the police because I know at this point this guy isn't letting up. He doesn't call, he's just watching. I finally get hold of my nerves and realize there's an exit to another freeway coming up. I'm in the lane second from the right, and as soon as I see the exit, I swerve as fast as I can to get on the freeway exit, barely missing the concrete pillar to the bridge above it. I only look over to the truck for a second, but I can see him looking straight at us. I'm sobbing at this point, and my ex just looks at me, and I know he saw him looking at us too. I pull off the first exit and find the first well-lit gas station I can, because I'm in no shape to drive anymore. My ex lets me sob for a bit, and we switch so he can finish the drive home. Once we get home, and I'm a little calmer, we start talking about it, and I explain what happened while he was asleep, and we get to the point where we're talking about pulling off and him looking at us and how fucking freaky that was. He kind of looks at me confused, and then is just quiet, and he goes, babe, he had a gun pointed at us. I have no fucking idea what this guy had in mind for us that night. The drive-ins were uneventful, and we hadn't pissed anyone off or even talked to anyone, so I don't think he followed us from there. Whoever you are, giant white truck guy, let's not ever meet. This happened a few weeks ago, but still sticks with me and makes me double check all the logs. September 2nd, 2024, I was working an overnight security gig. I've been a guard for 15 years, and other than getting into brawls at nightclubs, happens more often than you would think, I've had a pretty easy career, minus some contractor shit I did in Central America. The night had started the same way they always do. I'd gotten off my first gig and went to relieve the normal guard, who we will refer to as D from here on out. I arrive and D looks frazzled. He's an old martial arts guy that works at the apartment job for the same reason I do, half off the rent. I walk in and ask him what's up. He says he's encountered a guy by the gate that, quote, gave him the heebie-fucking-jeebies. He asked if I could go back to my apartment and grab my carry firearm. I hesitantly agree, because having worked in this industry long enough, guns rarely lead to good outcomes, but D is scared green, so I agree. I go back and grab not only the gun, but my dog, a 120-pound Anatolian Shepherd. I suit her up in her harness and grab her QD muzzle, on the off chance that something does go down. I'd rather have the dog ready to go. I arrive, and D is elated to get the fuck out of Dodge, gives the dog her standard good girl chicken strip, this is a nightly ritual regardless if I okay it or not, and takes off back to his apartment. I attach the dog's lead to my waist, and we go on patrol. I live in Texas, and our apartments are sealed by gates that you have to get the code for. I go check the first gate, and immediately come into contact with the person D was so worried about. It's 93 degrees out, and this dude is wearing a fucking trench coat with a hood. Before we even get near him, the dog starts going ballistic, hackles up in between my legs, snarling like some kind of feral monstrosity. I give her the command to chill, and she does. But what bothers me is the dude doesn't even flinch. Most people see a dog that big barking and snarling, and insist upon being no part of whatever it is the dog is protecting, in this case, me. At this point, I step forward and initiate contact. Hey buddy, how we doing, you alright? The man turns to face me, and at this point I see he's horribly disfigured. One eye missing but sealed up from surgery, the other a brilliant blue, and horrible scarring on the side of the face missing the eye. Yes, I'm fine, he responds rather quietly, sort of in the way a child who's trying to fix something on their own might respond. So do you live here? Haven't seen you around. My name is H. You new in town, or has anybody ever told you that you have incredible eyes? The simple statement made my blood run ice cold. At this point, I tap the QD on the muzzle and it swings out of the way. I'd like to think my mother used to tell me that, but can't say it's something I hear often. Listen man, you gotta get moving. If you don't live here, I can't have you standing out here. At this point, he sort of goes rigid and reaches in his pocket. I don't give him the chance to do much more as I draw my weapon at this point. Hey man, look, you gotta leave, I'm not telling you again. I don't know where the fuck you're from, but I know I ain't from around here. Last chance, fuck off. At this point, he sort of slowly removes his hand from his pocket, and he's holding this little 35mm disposable. He lifts it, snaps a photo, then says, "Have a good evening. Your eyes are beautiful." And then off he goes. About 5 minutes later, I'm still shaking when the cops arrive. Turns out, one of the apartments close to the gate heard the dog going nuts, and heard me raise my voice to our oddball friend, then called. They tell me they'll up the patrols, and that they hadn't gotten any other calls about the dude. Weird guy with the trench coat standing by my gate. Let's not meet, ever again. When my daughter was 6, we were at a crowded public park. A guy in a clown suit and full clown makeup was walking through the park, stopping at different families, handing them a balloon. At first, as I could tell, he didn't talk to anyone, just smiled and handed out balloons. I sat and watched as he came closer to the bench I was sitting on, giving out balloons along the way. I started to notice he was kinda filthy. His clown suit was dirty and worn, his face paint was a little smeared and sweaty. His white clown gloves had some holes and tears, and faint black grease smudged. My daughter wasn't with me. I was sitting alone. She was off in the distance, running around and screaming with the other kids. As the dirty clown got closer, I wondered if I would be able to get a balloon for her so I could give it to her when she stopped playing. Soon enough, the clown was in front of me. He smelled faintly like rotten garbage. I lifted up my hand as if to suggest I'd like a balloon, but he raised his finger and wagged it at me as if to say no. My daughter, off in the distance, must have seen me talking with the clown, as soon as I heard her little feet galloping towards me. "Daddy, can I have a balloon?" she yelled at me. She didn't look in my direction at all. She just stared up at the clown, who was smiling down at her. "Of course," I said, but the clown was already handing it to her. The balloon was yellow like his teeth. The clown silently walked away, on to the next family sitting nearby. My daughter liked the balloon, but she wasn't done playing yet, and asked if she could go back. I watched her run back to the play area with the other little kids, as I held the yellow balloon. After a minute or so I looked up at it. Wait a second, the balloon is sticky? Did I get some food on it? It looks like sauce, or maybe lotion. I touched it. It's on my finger now. What is this? I smelled it. Oh no, it's semen. Sounds like a fake story, I know, but it really happened. The only detail I may have made up was the clown's teeth. Not sure if I ever saw his teeth. I might have imagined they were yellow. I don't remember what I did with the balloon. This was 13 years ago, but I think I washed it off in the bathroom, because I thought she would panic if I threw it away. I never told her about this when she got older, never told her mom. This isn't really a paranormal story, but I remember it so well. I was young, maybe 10 or 11, and home alone after school. I was working on my homework upstairs when someone rang the doorbell. Sometimes my friend down the street would come over, so I ran downstairs thinking it was her. There was a window above our door, and it was very high up, so I usually could stand at the top of the stairs and look through it to see who was at the door, at the top of their head. This time there was a man just looking through that window. It must have been 7 feet off the ground, and he was eye-lined with it. He had a very round face, I remember, and a huge smile. It was something out of a horror movie. Then, my cat, who I regularly called Slutty because he is so friendly, starts growling. At him. My kitty was on the landing with me. He sees me at the top of the stairs landing and just says, "Hi, I'm here to check for pests. Can you let me in?" I duck down, and he says, "I saw you. I know your parents aren't home, but I need to come in." I still hear his voice clearly. I was terrified, and run down the stairs into the kitchen to grab a phone. He keeps asking me to open the door. Finally I tell him something like, "No, you'll have to come back another time." He won't take no for an answer, just keeps repeating himself. Then I tell him I'm going to call the police, all politeness out of the window. He says something about me being rude, and that I'm not stopping him from doing his job. I keep repeating that I will call the police, and he finally starts just screaming and cursing at me, and finally he slams his hand as hard as he can into the door. I start dialing, and he runs off calling me a bitch. I don't finish calling the police and sit near our front door until my parents come home. I didn't even know what bitch meant. Didn't tell them because I thought I'd get in trouble. Definitely not as scary as others here, but I remember it so clearly. His weird smile, his head perfectly round, and how he was so tall. I was really short as a kid. When I was a kid in elementary school, I had one best friend. We'll call him Jim. We were pretty much inseparable, and spent a ton of time at each other's houses. I loved when he came to my house. We'd play in my giant sandbox, or with my train set downstairs, or build snow forts in the winter. It was a blast. I wasn't as thrilled to go to his house, however. His mom was an absolute angel, soft-spoken, incredibly kind, and she often took us fun places, water parks, toy stores, museums, etc. What made me apprehensive was his dad. He was a complete 180 from Jim's mom. Really tall, well over 6 foot, perpetually grumpy, and had a booming voice that you could feel in the air when he spoke. He intimidated the living shit out of all the neighborhood kids that came over to Jim's house, including me. A good example of his ability to instill maximum fear simply by existing. I'd be over at Jim's house, walking down the hall to use their bathroom, and his dad would appear, coming from the opposite direction. He loomed over me like a giant, so I usually did my best to cower and try to be invisible as he went by. On more than one occasion, just as I was about to pass him, he spun on me and got right in my face, yelling, "What are you doing?" I'd stammer out that I intended to use the bathroom, but no longer needed to since I'd pissed my pants. He'd straighten back up and continue walking, laughing to himself as he went. In hindsight, I think he knew he scared the hell out of us and enjoyed it. That being the case, I quickly learned to recognize the sound of his truck when he came home. I'd run to Jim's room and wouldn't come out until it was time to go home. The other thing that was scary as hell, Jim's dad and mom got into loud arguments all the time. I'd have to give her credit. Jim's mom would get right back in his face and not back down an inch. Still, anytime we'd hear them shouting from the other room, we'd both worry that we'd get it from Jim's dad for some unknown reason. To the best of my knowledge, nothing ever became physical, but oh man, the racket they made when they got at each other. Once during the summer when we were all playing around at the pool, he approached me from behind, lifted me up, and tossed me into the deep end of the pool. I couldn't swim. I thrashed around wildly and was about to drown when Jim's mom dove in and pulled me out, giving her husband a nasty look. He just laughed to himself and wandered off. One winter day, when Jim, I, and his sister were sledding in the backyard, the zipper on my snowsuit came out of the track. I went inside and told Jim's mom, who told me his dad would fix it. I tried to say no, it's okay, but she was already calling him down the stairs. The booming response from the basement, "Send him down!" I went down those stairs as if I was living my final moments, all shaky and scared. There were almost no lights in the basement, just a single bulb hanging from a string in the workroom where he was located. "Come here," he boomed. I nervously stepped over, and he bent down on one knee to take a look at the zipper. Even then, he was still 3 feet taller than I was. He stood up and walked over to his bench, returning with a pair of needle-nose pliers. He put the wayward zipper back on its track, then bent so he was almost nose-to-nose with me. I was petrified. He took the pair of pliers, opened them, and placed them on my nose, then gave them a little bit of pressure. Just enough to where it almost hurt, but not quite. Then he removed them, stood, and chuckled like he always did. I must have been 140 miles per hour running up the stairs and back outside. As a little kid, I'd never been more terrified. Fast forward to age 15 and 16. My folks and I had long since moved out of the area, and Jim and I hadn't spoken since about 4th grade. My parents informed me that Jim's dad had been put on a predator list for having underage child content on his home computer. They asked me if anything funny had ever happened during my time at Jim's house as a kid. I immediately recalled the nose plier situation, and it sent a chill up my spine like you wouldn't believe. Thankfully, I wasn't a victim, but my blood ran cold when they told me that. I put my house up for sale, and my kids and I moved into a rental in a nearby town. The rent is cheap for this area, but this house needs some work. My landlord is the sweetest old lady, and she told me she couldn't rent to me in a good conscience without telling me about her son dying in the house. She didn't want me to hear it from the nosy neighbor and be upset. He was an adult who had a severe mental disability and schizophrenia, and couldn't function on his own, so he lived with her and her husband. One night, he repeatedly stabbed himself with a kitchen knife while they were sleeping. No one knows why. My landlord found him the morning after, but it was too late. It happened several years ago, but I still wasn't crazy about living here. In the end, I did take it due to a lack of options. I'm newly divorced and broke. My toddler has a genetic disorder that affects his motor skills, and he was nonverbal because of that. but he has recently developed some speech and used basic words. He's just now getting around to the baby talk phase most kids go through in their first year or so. So he couldn't really communicate to me why he'd been trying to talk to the wall in a certain corner of the room. There was nothing remarkable about it, but he would stand there for an hour or more and babble away if you let him. I watched him do it many times, and it was like he was really talking to someone. Kids do weird things sometimes, so I figured maybe it was an imaginary friend, something like that. I was up before dawn doing some work on my laptop a couple weeks ago, and he was the only person up with me. He went in the sunroom, and pretty soon I heard wild giggling coming from in there, so I got up to check on him. Usually, that kind of laughter means he's having fun doing something he knows he isn't supposed to. He was standing in the corner, and the way he was acting, it looked just like he was being tickled by something. He was laughing to the point he could hardly breathe when I pulled him away. He immediately cried and came to me for hugs, which makes me think he definitely wasn't enjoying that interaction, whatever it was. That was the first time I considered something paranormal might be happening there. It hasn't happened again, but he also lost interest in the corner and doesn't go near it. I'm trying to convince myself I'm being silly, and I'm just anxious over my life being uprooted and moving into a house that someone died and not peacefully in. But no. This house is seriously creepy. As soon as my house is sold, we're out of here. 4 times in my life, I've had dreams that I can only describe as premonitions. I'm a skeptic, and I still like to mostly believe that what I've experienced is pure coincidence, otherwise it creeps me out too much. These dreams are hyper-realistic and very specific. Usually I wake up from them with an intense need to immediately puke. The first one I had, I saw my good friend hanging out with some of his friends. They were planning to go party and decided to carpool. He gets into the back seat of a blue 4-door sedan just behind the passenger. The car gets into a terrible accident and he's ejected from the car as if he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He dies on the side of the road before his responders can get to him. I woke up, barely made it to the bathroom, and my whole body was shaking. I didn't want to call him, and felt like a complete idiot even thinking of calling him, but couldn't shake the feeling this was about to happen. So I call him, tell him the details, and ask that if he goes out tonight, to please wear his seatbelt. He confirmed that they were going to a club that night, but otherwise laughed it off, and was like, whatever. About an hour later he calls me, hysterical, crying and repeating that I saved his life. When he calmed down, he said that soon after the call, his friend pulled up to pick him up and the others. One had a brand new blue Honda Civic, and they motioned him to jump in. He felt stupid, but he told them he'd actually go to the other friend's car. On the way to the club, while crossing a busy intersection, someone blew a red light and T-boned the Civic, dead on the back passenger side. The car was totaled. The driver and passenger survived, but with serious injuries that they still deal with today. Again, I want to believe it was just coincidence, but I've had a few more coincidental dreams like this, and it seriously freaks me out when it happens. I used to live mostly alone on a mountain with my grandparents. I didn't move away until I was 25. Our property bordered the Cherokee National Forest in East Tennessee. That mountain was a paranormal hotspot, weird lights in the woods, noises, strange moving shadows, the works. Later I found out from a literal witch living at the base of the mountain, there's an energy vortex there, if you believe in that. I do through experience. Apparently, the local pagan community knows it well enough. I had the same reoccurring nightmare for 6 years. I would wake up, feel like something is off, look at my bedroom door, and there would be something standing in it. Sometimes it looked like it was someone I knew, but just wrong somehow. In a blur, it would rush me, my vision would go gray, I would barely be able to move. My whole body would feel like static, and I would hear something like a cross between the inside of a tornado, a waterfall, and 100 screaming voices. Then I would snap awake. Sometimes, right back into the start of the same nightmare 4 or 5 times before it would stop. I've had sleep paralysis before. This was different. I started sleeping during the day because this would only happen at night. And speaking of being up at night, I was awake around 4 a.m. It was storming outside. I was chilling, playing EVE Online when the phone starts ringing. I have one in my room, one in my folks' room, and one in the living room. I let it ring for a minute. Finally, I pick it up. As I do, I feel something standing directly behind me. Over the phone, it sounds like someone trying to talk while dunking the receiver into a bucket of water. After a solid 3 minutes of listening, trying to make out anything and panicking because something is behind me, in a second room, the line just goes dead, and whatever is behind me disappears completely. One time I was out walking in the forest, because frankly this was the early thousands, and we still only had dial-up, so life was boring. I was on a path I knew very well when I walked into a clearing I didn't remember seeing before. There were a few very small trees, spaced 10 to 15 feet apart, still completely green-leafed, even though it was nearly fall. The ground was completely cleared of leaves and covered in moss. I could not hear birds or wildlife anymore, and there was an almost overwhelming sense of wanting to sit down and just stay there, but I headed home because it was getting late, and those woods were not pleasant to be in at night. It was also the only place in that forest I'd ever been that didn't feel like I was being followed at all times. I left to go back the next day, and no matter how many times I retraced my steps, I never saw it again. That place was active day or night. If you wandered out into the woods, even in the middle of the day, you would still feel like something was standing right behind you at all times. Hello everybody, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been wanting to do a video like this for a long time. I've honestly been looking for videos like this for a long time, so I'm very excited to get this up. Help bring in the spooky season on this last day of September. I hope to do a lot more, so if you liked it, please stick around. I will definitely be uploading much more of these types of videos. So, also, if you have any spooky stories that you would like read, send them my way, because I'd love to read them and share them with everybody. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!